My name is Andrew McGowan. I'm a musician and athlete who geeks out on fashion, art, and great food. I've spent time working with elite performers, repairing instruments for major symphony musicians, training for marathons, and designing wardrobes from everyone from freshman college students to big city lawyers. Trequartista is the Italian word for playmaker and is used to describe a particularly creative role on the soccer pitch, typically behind the central striker. And as the musical trequartista, I aim to kickstart conversations about topics and areas that I think are underrated, underdiscussed, or particularly important to a sustainable, high-octane life. This is the Musical Trequartista, the podcast. Good morning, everybody. So, this is a really special episode. It's our first interview on the podcast with my amazing friend and percussion wizard, Elliott Godinez. He's an incredibly gifted and insightful musician. He recently recorded my piece, In the Dark Blue Sky You Keep, for Glockenspiel and Fixed Media, which we talk a bit about in this interview, as well as like the state of classical music, where we see things going, a lot of stuff about him personally, and then we talk about his nonprofit a little bit. So I really hope you enjoy this episode, because it was amazing to record. What were we... Let's be our cold open. What were we saying about before you got your phone call?
What were we talking about? That's a good question.
I don't know. Mics, maybe?
Oh, yeah. Well, what would it be like if I had my condenser mic?
Oh, yeah.
This one?
Like, so I think, I think it gets weird. Like, so when, like, a lot of the comedians do their podcasts, they have, like, well, because they have two Shure SM7Bs plugged into the same mixer, I think it picks up aggregate sound rather than, like, so like that way you can isolate certain areas rather than like picking up the ambience from each side, because it's all going into the same space. Like that might organize that sound better. I don't know how well two different mics plugged into two different mixers would work. Like they could be like the weirdest audio ever.
I mean, it happens, man. I mean, honestly, like I couldn't tell like with a lot of things like that, especially with just. Because when I was going through and editing the audio for Blue Sky, I was just like, I half know what I'm doing, because I mean I picked up a little stuff, especially at Soci when I went, of like working with the 10 bands and all those things, so I kind of get it. But then sometimes it's weird also because I haven't really recorded Glock a ton.
Yeah.
And it's sort of just like, what is that sound that you're supposed to be going for? Which is weird because like I never know. I'm like, this sounds like a Glock. But is it supposed to sound like the right one? But in my head, I'm like, wait, who the hell else knows about this?
Yeah. Well,
and would care.
The other thing I would also argue is, like, it's subjective enough where, like, I mean, we're at the point where we get to decide what good sound is for us. And so, like...
That makes sense.
It doesn't, like, there's no... the conventional wisdom is obviously there to inform our opinion, but, like, technically it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
Which is so weird to think about. And, like, when recording Glock, I gotta imagine it gotta be weird just because it sits in such a high tessitura and the attack is so prominent that it's just, like, overloading the mic is gotta be super easy.
Well, it didn't happen as... It can happen. I mean, you just gotta mess with the gain a good amount. But, I mean, I kind of like that, the piercingness. But it also just does kind of suck when you're like actually listening back and suddenly all the notes that are even slightly brighter in like IRL are kind of, they just in the recording just cut way too hard.
Totally. But like that's really interesting to hear you say though, because like on the composition end of things, it was awesome for me because I'm like the Glock tessitura is so high compared to basically everything I would use in most electric processing that like I never had to worry about whether, like, there were going to be too many kids in the pool, if you know what I mean. Where, like, too many of the voices are, like, meshing over one another. And that's a problem that, like, brass one composers and arrangers just have too much of an issue of, where they'll score everything super, super thickly so none of the ideas really come through.
Yeah.
And so, like, in writing for Dark Blue Sky, it was like... well, Neil's gonna come through because like his voice is so much lower than the Glock, so I just got to like, okay, yeah, I'm gonna have to like make sure his gain is loud enough and boost the vocals, but that's like a basic balance thing, and you can adjust that with volume. Yeah. Like it's gonna come through, which was super helpful. And then like because so much of that like warped Rob drum sound is in the background, like that just needed to be there to like fill empty space. And then create those moments of escalation. That's kind of it. And so, like, from a processing standpoint, that's like, I mean, like, for me, I'm like, great, so much I don't have to worry about as far as, like, voicings go.
Yeah, exactly. No, and it obviously it's just, like, you know, hugely, like, so drastically apart with the range that you can't really help but notice that, yeah, that's there.
Totally. I wanted, for everybody listening, I'm here with Elliott Godinez, my good friend, who some of you might know better as Elliott G Percussion online. We're talking about In the Dark Blue Sky You Keep, which is a new piece for Glockenspiel and Electronics that I composed for him. And Elliott, I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit about your personal side of that story, because I know there's like a pretty personal story that went into you commissioning this piece for me.
Yeah. Well, first off, I didn't really even realize until I think it was actually hilariously enough, it was one of the ads for one of the Dead Space games. I don't know if you ever played those.
No, I haven't.
It's like an Xbox one, I think. I mean, it's probably everywhere else, but I really like. I'm really into video games, obviously, but I really like video game music. Not that Twinkle Twinkle Little Star was in Dead Space, but it's just interesting how those things always connect. But anyway, it was just like video screenshots from video grabs from like gameplay, but somebody was narrating Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, and then the lady kept going, and I was like, wait a minute, and then I finally looked into it, and I was like, oh crap, Twinkle Twinkle Little Star actually has more words. I didn't even realize that, but it was just like really, I don't know, I liked it. Like I something about it really spoke to me, like talking about like the traveler in the dark. That was just like, I don't know why, that was just terrifying to me. Like just to imagine being somebody, and like way back before, you know, obviously GPS or anything, just somebody literally just traveling in the dark, and then you literally have just one star. I just thought that was like, you know, crazy. And it's just like the showing how, again, leading to like one of the things that you're trying to show with the piece, that we're just so small in the grand scheme of things, but we have like that one star, that one like finite point that we could just like count on being there. But anyway, fast forwarding later, like I became aware of the poem, and I was like, wow, this is really cool. And then one day I was in northern Michigan with my friends Chuck Willard and Miles Bowman, because we were teaching there with a group called Lighthouse Brigade. And we were just outside of our housing site looking at stars, and we're just hanging out, having a good time. And then I just decided to share the poem with them. And in that moment, though, I just felt so at peace, which I obviously, you know, I'm a fan of having you know, peaceful moments, because that doesn't really happen to me, but when it does happen, it's just like, wow, this is really beautiful. And I was glad that I could share that with my friends that were like just hanging out and literally sharing poetry. Like that just already sounds kind of poetic in my own mind, like to just share poetry like that. but yeah, and then yeah, I hit you up with about the idea for the piece, and now here we are.
Yeah, I love it. One of the things you mentioned that I don't think we had talked about is like this idea of kind of just gazing up at the night sky and feeling like insignificant in like the hands of the universe almost. But like how as much as that is terrifying, it's also oddly comforting in like the weirdest possible way. And so like that's something I've meditated on a lot, and one of the things I really enjoy doing when I get the chance to just go like lay in the grass at nighttime. And so like capturing that energy was super wild in terms of like my own compositional process. Cause like in thinking about that, I wanted the piece to be sparkly enough to really kind of capture that, but not so active that it was going to be nuts.
Yeah. And I think when I had originally came to you, I think I said that, yeah, like it was the exact same idea with space and stuff. But I think I was hoping slightly for something like really fast and really quick and very like sleek almost. I guess I was thinking of like shooting stars. Yeah, basically, like, I was thinking of, like, shooting stars, but you weren't at all. You were just thinking, like, no, these are very still. These are very still. And it was more so about, like, when the notes are as sparse as they were, it does add to it, because it felt like they were just points of light that, you know, in performance time, you know, they were, like, fractions of a second apart, but that's because we are perceiving it, like, right there. Like, I am right in front of it. But obviously, when you realize the enormity of it, what looks not very far apart in the sky is actually millions of light years away. Or like they're like, even though they're right next to each other, you got to think about how far away they still are, like like from the Earth, not just left to right, but back to front, which is crazy to me to think about as well. It actually reminds me, with my girlfriend Tara, we went to this Valentine's Day thing at a planetarium. So I obviously I love space and stuff. We went to this planetarium in Peoria for this like Valentine's star show, and it was like the craziest thing, because they had like it had like a little image of the Earth and then like the night sky and everything. But one thing that shattered my mind was that like all of the stars, and I'm probably totally butchering the science on this, but all of the night stars that we see actually only exists in like this bubble that's like, I'm gonna just throw a number out there, let's just say like 15 light years or something across.
Yeah.
But then there's all the other stars that still exist everywhere else. Like even our own night sky and like starry sky is still insignificant to the rest of the universe.
Oh, totally. Because like, I mean, if you think about it like a blast radius, so like, we have like if we're standing on the Earth at our origin point and it like extends outward, like, we think about light pollution from the Earth's point of view as like creating so much light that it prevents like that faint light from stars that's really like 10 billion light years away or whatever from coming in. But like, almost in a sense, like the light pollution of the stars that we can see warps the space-time or like the gravity of those bodies warps enough of the light that's coming in from farther out that we're never going to see it, which is nuts.
Yeah, exactly. And I can't remember where I saw this, but it was like an image somewhere I saw on the internet where somebody like they like one of those, obviously, you know, huge telescopes. They focused it on one point of the sky for like a while, and it was like, I think it was like overexposing it or something. I'm not sure what the exact term is, but when they were done with their project, they had the night sky, but instead of just like the regular stars, it showed like the galaxies that we couldn't really see. It was it was actually way more colorful than just black and white, which I thought was interesting. But yeah, like everything that we can't see, and it just keeps going. Like some people are scared of the ocean for its like enormity and because of its unknowns. But space is just like that. I mean, I guess the ocean is scarier because it's like, you know, literally right here on our front doorstep. Like, you know, if you're thinking about it in terms of like relative to space, but still, it's just like.
But space is infinite.
Exactly.
It's like the ocean has an end.
Exactly. You know, you could probably figure out all that's in the ocean someday.
Oh yeah, no, like we could dead ass map the entirety of the ocean, but like we ain't never gonna map all of space. Yeah. And space is actually just getting bigger. That's right. Yeah, it keeps stretching too. So in your recording, one of the things that struck me so much, and I know I mentioned this to you at some point, and I will like show this video to like so many of my brass students going forward, is it is an absolute masterclass in articulation, and just being able to see like this rack of mallets next to you, and you're like, I'm using like, and there are times that I was laughing when I was watching it the first time because you'd like use a mallet for a note and then put it back. And I'm like, this is the best, one of the best things I've ever seen. As far as like, I need to be so artfully purposeful in my choices for this. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Well, first off, it's always great. We talk about in the percussion community how important it is to, especially as a keyboardist, like as a marimbist, you need to play repertoire that's by non-percussionists, because while the composers in the percussion community that are percussionists themselves make some amazing music for our instruments, it's only like within their understanding of percussion and its performance practice. So that influences, obviously, as you might imagine, a ton of of the music that they make. So it's always great to have a non-percussionist like yourself to write music, because you're not really concerned with that, or it's not really that you're not concerned. Obviously, you're concerned with, is it playable, but your head isn't there the whole time. It's not influenced by that. You're always just like, what's my musical creative things? And that's why I like your music. Like when you wrote Dryer for at Dryer 307 Hovey, where it's just all freaking bit break drums. It just like, and then I was like, this is really hard, but we'll do it. And then but that's the point. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, can you play it or not? Like, no, it's like, what did the composer intend? Which is always the best type of writing for percussion. It's purely music at that point. Anyway, so yeah, with that in mind, that's my first point. The second point is that implements, like the mallets that we pick as percussionists, are really important. Especially when you got so many of them. Like we just hoard them. Like I used to have I used to have a lot more, but unfortunately I had my last apartment flooded, and then I lost like about $1,000 worth of mallets.
I remember that.
Yeah, that was really rough. I mean, fortunately, my marimba mallets, which are the most expensive ones, got saved. But so actually, if you gave me this piece maybe 2 years ago, I would have had way more choices of mallets to use. But what I did have available actually gave me a pretty wide variety. So implements, and obviously we got to consider what each implement sounds like in the different ranges of the instrument but in this case it's a glockenspiel. So the softest mallets that I used wouldn't have sounded like anything in the top of the instrument, because it's just too dull. There would have been no attack. It would have just been mostly a thud sound, which would not have sounded very good. And that's kind of what I went for. Was I looked at the music and I decided, okay, what are the moments that there's some voices happening, like there's some polyphony, I guess, for lack of a term right here. In those instances, I would use mallets that were sometimes really close, or sometimes it's really, really different for each other in both hands, so that we have clearly voices playing back and forth, but voices that are shaded so differently that they can be perceived as different voices.
Totally.
And then I looked at the moments that were more monophonic, such as like the like in the middle of Dark Sky Dark Sky.
Yeah, the B section.
Yeah, so like when in the middle of that, where it's all more of like one line, but just like traveling really, really back and forth and jumping all over the place. Then that's when I went for mallets that were more similar in their hardnesses and in their weights. But that was something that I also wanted to avoid, was using that just seems like such a vanilla template for mallet selection. Is okay, low sounds get soft mallets, high sounds get high mallets. So I did want to like deviate a little bit away from that. And there's like one moment where in the piece where Neil is like talking about Stardust specifically, where I switched to all they call them the magic flute mallets in the percussion community, because they're just so light and like pretty. I like these mallets a lot. They're like super small, but in that section I made sure that like, no, I'm going to use these really, really bright ones, because it's the ending, and he's like, now we're like really driving the point home. It's stars. I'll just use these really, really bright ones, because in the high and the low, because brightness, it's just like twinkling like the whole way around. And that was really fun to experiment with. It was just really choosing all of these different types of mallets. I think what I came up with worked out pretty well.
Oh, I thought it was amazing. I mean, if that wasn't evident before, like, I think at the very least, it's a visual masterclass in articulation. And then, like, on top of like how well the performance came off, like the video from last week, just like blew my brain to smithereens. I've listened to it probably like a dozen times. Which, like, I try not to listen to my own music too much, because I think it's kind of like self-revelatory. But like, I mean, your performance is just so clean, and I don't think a lot of composers get like a chance to hear their music played. But I mean, for so many times, it's like you write it for the premiere and it never gets done. And one of the things I've enjoyed, this is gonna sound really weird, one of the things I've enjoyed about the pandemic is like this institutionalization of like, oh no, dude, let's like record music videos as classical musicians, and I think that's great. And so, and then having access to that on YouTube, like, the premiere is like infinite.
Yeah.
It never really ends. which is really cool. And I love that it allows us to like go back and like hear like that first real performance again and again. So like one of the ones that I am really proud of from last summer is Yellow Hallways. That like Steve Reich 7 euphoniums.
That one was sick. I like that one.
Especially because like I recorded all of the parts and I wrote it in like. So that project was really weird. I wrote it and recorded all of it in 36 hours, and I napped twice in the course of that period. But literally just like blew through everything. Because I was living with my parents at the time because I had just left Chicago because of like all the wacky stuff that had gone on up there, and like it was so wild because my parents had gone camping with some of their friends, and I had moved all of the furniture out of their living room because it was the boomiest space in the house. And then like had my tiny little condenser mic balanced on top of a door, and then recorded all of these samples and stuff. And it was wild because like I didn't actually have sheet music for it. I wrote up a lead sheet and then had all the chord changes written out, and was like, okay, I just need all of these samples and all of these sections, and then mixed it. So it's such a wild project, but it's so fulfilling to be able to keep going back and being like, this is the premiere, and it just keeps growing and growing and growing because like I mean at some point maybe people might stop watching it on YouTube, or I might like decide to redo it, but in the grand scheme of things, like it just gets bigger, which is so cool. Jumping back to what you said about playing piece by non-percussionists, I think that's super important for like people of all instrument varieties. Yeah. And I think one of the things that like is really under discussed, because so many, coming from the brass wind side of stuff, there's so many brass wind composers that are just like, oh, I'm a brass player, so I write for brass, which is great. But for me, it was really, really powerful going into a lesson with Dr. Magnuson as a freshman in college. And he said, Andrew, you should stop writing euphonium music for a bit. I was like, really? Yeah. Because, I mean, you know all of it, which is great, but, like, figure out how to write other stuff and then go back. And then taking, like, 3.5-year hiatus. And so, like, I mean, and what that turns into is I think I had an output of upwards of 2 hours of music before I wrote anything else for euphonium again. And it changed everything about how I approach it. Yeah. Which is really, really fascinating. Well, and then there were times when it was like, oh, I don't have to worry about playability, like, because I'll be able to do it if I just practice a lot, which is true, but also stupid. Yeah. Well, and one of the things I've been thinking about a lot, and that I know you and I have talked about before, is that, like, this idea of, like, playing things that are so, like, only playable by the top 1% of 1% of people doesn't really add that much value to the craft. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and if anything, I'm definitely all for just, like, and I've said this before, like, accessibility in general. I mean, like, yeah, it's really fancy and, like, flashy to, like, play just really hard stuff, but sometimes, like, is it even musically, does it even have, like, enough weight to, like, stand on its own otherwise, like, or is it just hard? Yeah. And so one piece I think that does both of those things really well, at least from the euphonium side of stuff, is the Anthony Barfield Euphonium Concerto. It's an immaculate piece of music, but if it was written down of like a fifth, I think it would be uncontested as like the best euphonium concerto written, because it would be accessible to a whole load more people. Yeah. As opposed to where it is right now, where it's very not typical of a euphonium concerto, because there's not like tons of crazy like dexterity necessarily required for most of the concerto. Obviously you need some of it to execute it, and there's some cool runs and stuff in it, but it's very lyrical, even in like a lot of the fast sections, which I love. It's a level of writing and orchestration that you just don't see in a lot of euphonium music. But the endurance requirements for any one of the movements, let alone all three of them, are redonkulous. Yeah. There's just no way to say it. And so, like, I mean, there's a reason Damondre Thurman is the only person who's recorded it that I know of. Yeah. I mean, yeah, he's recorded it like 3 times because he's a baller. But like, I mean, and granted, I think all of those have been live, but still, like, it's it's frustrating that like that's the point it's gotten to. And so I think if we can have music of that level of quality but accessible to even just the top 5% of euphonium players or the top 25% of euphonium players, or in your case like the top 5 or the top 25% of percussionists, what does that do for the art? Because it really allows to push the genre way differently. And so like, excuse me, in approaching In the Dark Blue Sky You Keep, one of the things I was really trying to pay conscientious attention to is like, okay, how can I make an artistic statement? And the beauty of doing electronics is like you can use narrator, which I do all the fucking time because like why not?
Yeah.
But so you can then make something that has a narrative that's really easy for audiences who are not musically inclined to attach to.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, they're like, oh, there's all this pretty music going along with it. But pushing it's very difficult to push an artistic boundary without also pushing a technical boundary. And so finding where that mean is really interesting.
Yeah, and you talked about... and then after I recorded it the first time, I sent you a first recording, and then you asked me, like, what do you think it is difficulty-wise? And I was just like, no, it's fine. And then you were like, it's like, well, is it playable by, like, a high school student? Like, probably not. Is it playable by, like, a college freshman? Okay, yeah, probably. And that's one of the things that, and going a little bit back to the whole accessibility thing, is, like, good for you on that, because, you know, more people could play it. But also, like, I think it's but with the whole electronics thing, that's very accessible for like lots of people, because I played a solo Glock piece before, Hope by Dave Molk, and it's pretty weird. I mean, for percussionists and like, you know, other like people that like this kind of music, like you and I and the people we go to school with, it's just like, ooh, interesting, yeah, very nice. But like but you know, to an average audience person, it's just like, what the heck is this? Like, it's just so weird. Because I feel like, you know, obviously we get really full of ourselves sometimes, like, oh, this is the highest of all art, but no, if you think about the person walking down the street listening to your music, like, what the heck is that? So that's what I really like about Blue Sky and the accessibility of that with the narrative and the narration, because we were talking about premieres as well. The premiere of Blue Sky happened also virtually, which I thought was a little bit interesting as well. It was for I was talking at my elementary school. My former band director had me on to talk to his percussionists about this program that I'm starting, and I was able to open my presentation with Blue Sky. That was actually the first performance of it, and I thought about it for a while too, because I was preparing this presentation, and I was like, what could I even play for these students, because I just finished my master's degree, so all the repertoire that I know is like super obscure, like marimba literature, and I'm like, I'm not going to play that for 7th and 8th graders. And then I was like, wait a minute, like, obviously, like, I'm learning Blue Sky, so this is perfect. And it was very accessible to them because it's just narration. And it's like, it's a very easy to follow story. And then at the same time, though, I was like, wow, I am showing these kids a contemporary glockenspiel and electronic solo. Like, how often does that happen, though?
Yeah.
But it happened because it was an accessible piece. You know, and then it's like, and that's the good thing for our art is, reaching new audiences that way, because where else would they hear music like that?
Totally. One of the gripes I have with contemporary music sometimes is like, in making pitch completely objective, you alienate listeners that are not
totally
musically inclined.
Yes, totally.
And so, like,
totally.
Like, one of the things I enjoy so much about Debussy is he really does everything that, well, not only better than every contemporary music composer ever, because Claude Debussy was a freaking genius, yeah. But in ways that are really accessible through color.
Yeah.
There's a really awesome video from a YouTube channel called Listening In. Listeners, please go subscribe to that guy's channel. He's amazing. He writes about all different kinds of music. But he has a video talking about how Debussy was inspired by Japanese wood paintings that he found while he was living in Rome. And he found them in like antique shops and stuff. And I think that comes across so much in a lot of his music. Where I mean, like living in Paris and being around like the French Impressionists of the time, like there's so much of his music that sounds like what watercolors look like.
Yeah, and it definitely is a lot about color, which is why I like Blue Sky, because, and again, it's like making that type of music more accessible, because people don't typically listen to French Impressionistic music or minimalism like that often, nor should they. I think.
Devastating.
I don't mean that. Anyway, but yeah, like. But the whole idea of colors and bringing that out as well is something that like I try to show in music, and I try to teach my students as how important that sort of thing is. Like, for example, when I teach drumline, and then it's very easy for any percussion student or any percussionist to beat the hell out of the drum and like choke the stick. But it's only when you teach your students, hey, what happens when we actually don't choke the sticks? What sounds are the sticks making themselves? Let's play the instruments. Whoa, you hear those layers, like, and it's happened before where I'm like in a clinic, and I'm trying to teach this, and then the students suddenly play with like lighter hands, and then I'm like I'm gesturing around the room, and I'm like, y'all hear that? Y'all hear the extra like ringing that's happening? You're activating more parts, more shades of the sounds, because you're approaching the instrument differently. And then that's, again, so going back a little bit, that's why I try to teach to my students. Color is very important, because you're not just hitting a drum, you're not just making rhythms. You gotta be precise. You gotta like mean to make these sounds. And how do you get better at meaning, or how do you get better at making the sound that you mean to make? You listen. Like, that's the most important thing, I think, is just listening. And which is kind of my gripe about some modern music, is that like it's almost too accessible. Like, there's not enough variety, which is why I like music like Blue Sky, because you're forcing variety in like one medium. Like you have like one like basic color, like blue. How many different blue sky? How many different shades of blue can you make with like a pretty limited amount of materials? I had a whole rack of mallets, but like there's so many more different types of mallets. There's like all different types of it just goes on forever. So, and then that reminds me as well that we actually did that at ISU. I can't remember who suggested it to Dr. Collier there, but we had a whole day in the concert hall where we went in, and then some of us just rolled out the instruments on the stage, and the rest of the percussion studio was sitting in the balcony, and we took the time to play excerpts using different types of mallets.
It's genius.
And then and we were just like immediate, like, and obviously on stage you can't tell that much, but in the audience it's ridiculous, especially things like on xylophone, which is another instrument that cuts, and Glock. Those were like the two instruments that we actually used the most, because obviously those are the two instruments that we use the most in that concert hall anyway. But just a simple mallet change from mallets that are probably like pretty similar in hardnesses, but if they're off just enough in weight, then that creates a much different, like, it highlights different shades, and especially depending where you are in a concert hall. So definitely like color is I think it's just super important to me.
I would imagine that the way that the line is played then is really affected by the way the mallets are weighted, because the momentum of your stroke is going to be different.
Yeah, and what sucks as well is when you're using 4 mallet technique, like I was in the video. It also means that you can only hold the mallet from a certain spot, which also throws off the weight, because that was actually really hard. Like the opening thing of the piece, when I finally picked up 4 mallets, the ones over my left hand, they're actually way longer than most mallets. They're like xylophone, multi-percussion. They're not even meant for glockenspiel. Yeah, some of the mallets weren't even meant for Glock.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so you just experiment. You experiment with what you got.
That's artistry.
Yeah, thank you. So already, just by the way I'm playing, I had to like consider, oh crap, not only are these weighted differently than the mallets in the other hands, they're also a different length. So the trajectory is already going to be thrown off, and that affects a lot of the sound as well.
Totally. One of the things I was thinking about, and now I've thought about a ton. I think we've talked about this some. When you were talking about like how many shades of blue can we pull from like if you say like, oh, this piece sounds like blue, and I think composers are behooved to figure out how to write for electronics now that we've entered an age where that's really, really accessible. And so like the Cage book that I loaned you last week, Silence, in that he talks about like one day we'll have a quartet that's for like breaking glass, car horn, violin, and gunshots. And I don't know if we necessarily have to go that far with it, though I'm sure like somebody has. But the thing that I keep thinking about is it just in terms of programming a solo recital, like if all of your pieces are just instrument and piano, like that doesn't give you a lot of variety as far as orchestration and can actually get really, really boring for the audience members. And one of the things like in the like marathon of percussion recitals that we went to in March of this year, including yours, which was probably like one of my favorite recitals I've been to. One of the things I love so much about it and have loved about percussion recitals so much is because you have to demonstrate all of these things that you're capable of doing. There's so much change in orchestration between pieces because like, I mean, snare drum and marimba don't have that much in common, which I think actually is fantastic as far as programming for the recitals. Yeah. And so in terms of writing for electronics, like your timbral options become infinite in terms of working with the accompaniment, or you could have like multiple stories going on if you have multiple pieces that use voiceover like a lot of mine do, or like do you do really ambient stuff? Do you do really active electronics? I mean, Jakob TV's music is epic and should probably be on like way more people's recitals because it's incredible. Yeah. And I mean, not all of it uses speech pattern, but a lot of it does. And I mean, like his use of that versus mine is just so different. But I think, I mean, even like some of the pieces that are coming out now that are kind of concerto style, but instead of doing a piano reduction, they just give you like the highest quality MIDI of the orchestral parts. Yeah. Like, that's huge. And that's a sound you're not normally going to hear on a solo recital.
That's right. Yeah, I've been enjoying that Cage book, by the way. Silence is what it's called, right? Yeah, Silence. Oh my god, there's that one part in there that freaking like it blew my mind with the Zen student who was like there for 3 years with his master, and then he's like, I didn't learn anything, and his master told him like, stay for 3 more months. Stays for 3 more months, doesn't learn anything. Teacher tells him stay 3 more weeks, and then he's like, I still haven't learned anything. He's like, all right, stay for 3 more days. If you haven't found enlightenment by the 3rd day, kill yourself. And then the student found enlightenment after the 2nd day. And I was just like, I'm not sure why I read that, but that's a crazy story. I mean, there's a lot to unpack. I'm that one's gonna sit with me for a long time. I'm gonna be thinking about that one in the back of my mind forever, and then one day I will achieve enlightenment by understanding what that story means. But yeah, and I totally agree with that. That with electronic music, the possibilities again, literally are infinite, which is amazing because all of those different sounds to discover, and then again for your audiences and just for people trying to bring people into to contemporary music or contemporary classical music. It's just like, look, listen to this. Oh, this is like you think a saxophone recital is kind of weird or a trombone recital is kind of weird. Well, what if it sounds like this? And it's just so much cooler that way.
Totally. Another recital I go back to thinking about a lot as far as orchestrational variety is our friend Jordan Harvey's graduate recital. Yeah. Do you remember that? Where
I'm not sure if I went to that one.
Oh man, I think it. Other than your graduate recital, it's the best collegiate recital I've been to, and part of that was because again, orchestrational variety. I mean, tons of unaccompanied trombone music, but one of them he opened with the entire Bach first cello suite, and then played fantastic polka with Patty, which is worlds apart from that.
Yeah.
And so you get the trombone and piano thing, and then there was a Jakob TV piece for trombone quartet that was amazing. The piece is Jesus is Coming. For anybody listening, go look it up. It's incredible. And then Basta was on it, and a couple. I think there was another piece too, and just like not only the stylistic variety, but the orchestration variety, and just it was just so epic. And so variety of orchestration for me is like really a huge thing that I think more musicians need to pay attention to, especially in their solo recitals.
Oh yeah, definitely.
One thing I'd like to ask is, what do you wish more composers knew about writing for percussion, or what do you wish more composers did when writing for percussion?
Well, that's a good question.
Because like we've talked about accessibility a lot.
Yeah, I think. Well, for one, just write. It's way easier to overwrite and then water. I think that's something that I feel like especially a lot of percussionists arranging for like high school marching band would agree with. Is like it's a lot easier to overwrite and then water. But honestly, like I don't think that they should know. I kind of don't want to say too much because for the same reason that like I like your writing, like just write music. I think that's probably what it should come down to first. I mean, obviously you should understand the ergonomics and like the actual practicality of playing some things sometimes. I've played a lot of composers' music where it's just huge skips like with no time in between across the marimba from like the low end to the high end, and it's like this is impossible. Or like weird scalar things that probably look really pretty on paper and probably sound really nice on Sibelius or something, but like just on the instrument is like this feels terrible to play. I will try my best, but this feels terrible and it's gonna sound awkward until I get it right. But honestly, like just focus on the music. The music should always come first, unless you're writing a method book or like a technique book, should you really be worrying about technique? I think, which is a good point. Which is what I don't. Which is why, like, I mean, I've played through some technique books, obviously in undergrad, and I'm not gonna say the names of them, but sometimes the music feels like very like this is interesting music, but like wow, am I bored because this is just focusing on one sort of technique in like in four mallet marimba playing or in snare drum playing. Like it has to be about the music. But then again, it's not like I would consider any of those pieces fantastic recital pieces or anything.
Yeah, well, that's almost kind of the point, though. It's like this is a piece for you to learn how to do this.
Exactly,
so that if you
exactly.
need to do it to
I know.
music, it can happen.
Yes,
no, I totally get it.
So I'm shitting on it, even though it's literally doing its job. So it does its job great. But I think we shouldn't try to keep writing that. Unless you come up with like a better way to practice double lateral strokes and make it sound somehow more musical. There's only so much you can do, obviously.
Totally.
If you limit yourself that way.
Yeah, I completely agree. And one of the things I want to mention while we're still on this topic is like how invaluable it's been working with you. Like for what? Like we're probably going on like 6 years now.
Yeah, I think so.
In terms of like your willingness to look at all of my percussion parts and the amount of times I've been like, is this the stupidest thing I could do? Does this work? When like the number of hours that we spend in the percussion studio, like, okay, let's figure out timbre for this. And I remember, I think it was you and me and maybe Michael Swaw and maybe Chuck when we went in to figure out like scrap metal stuff for Saruman the Wise. And we were like whacking all kinds of weird metal for like that really industrial section in the middle. And I was like, okay, how do I notate this? So that like making sure going into Wind Symphony readings that y'all were gonna have stuff and be like, oh, okay, this is what he wants for these parts, but also like having a few people in the section that were gonna be like, we need toys for this piece. So when orchestra read my arrangement of all those themes from the Kirby video games, and then didn't even bother to get out the chimes, I was like livid. I was livid, and like I looked at Dr. Block and was like, "Are we serious? Like we're just gonna play chimes parts on vibraphone? Like,
gosh,
it hurt me inside a lot." Especially because it was my orchestration final. Like, this doesn't sound like it's supposed to sound. Like, what is this? But if for any composers listening, my best advice is like if you don't write for an instrument very often or don't know about writing for an instrument very often, or even if you do, just like get people to review it. I get trumpet players to review first trumpet parts for me all the time to make sure that I'm not like gonna destroy their faces. Because trumpet can be a pain. So when you look for new pieces to play, not that I imagine you're somebody who runs out of a list of things you'd like to perform, but if you're in a point where you're like looking for something new, or if something like a piece jumps out at you, what do you typically look for?
That's a question that I've asked myself a lot recently, because that's something that I'm sort of struggling with myself as an artist or as a musician, is identity. Is like, what is my sound? I feel like, which is why I wish I composed, because I've said this to many people that I've met recently, that I feel like my creative output begins and ends at my instrument, which is like not a fun spot to be in if you're like trying to make it. Like, you should have a voice for yourself. That's what they tell you. You should definitely sound like yourself, and I think in some ways I do sound like myself. And people have been reassuring me with that fact recently, so I'm just gonna roll with that and feel slightly better and maybe table that conversation for a second. But anyway, things that I have realized about myself that I gravitate towards too is definitely like lots of like your piece, yellow doors.
Oh, Yellow Hallways.
Oh, Yellow Hallways, right. Yellow Doors.
Yellow Doors.
With the
that'll be the sequel.
Oh my god, that sounds like that's a great piece title. But like just like really reggae stuff like that, like kind of like minimalist, I want to say, but with like lots of pulsing, like lots of pulses and like and strobes, I want to call them, because I'm going on a slight tangent. There's this great book by Steve Schick, The Percussionist's Art, where he talks about like and I'm sure many people like on YouTube, I'm sure Adam Neely or whoever has talked about this already, about how pitch is rhythm and how harmony is rhythm. Like if you break down like the actual frequencies of everything, and I'm probably gonna totally butcher the science on this again. If you break down like the frequencies and the ratios of frequencies between intervals, a perfect fourth, I think, is like a 4/3 or something. An octave is a 2-to-1 ratio. So if you got 1 and 2, that and if you speed that up to the certain it's not RPMs. If you speed it enough to the
frequency,
if you speed it to the right frequency, it will sound like a C and then an octave, C3 and C4, like somehow, and then 4/3 being a fourth. I think 2/3 is like a third or something. But that whole idea is just crazy to me about how we are just vibrations as matter, and like as physical things, we are just vibrations of things and pulses. So we have pitch, sort of. And then and everything resonates to a pitch. The earth has a pitch, which I think is freaking bananas.
I mean, that's the idea behind string theory.
Yeah. And where was I going with this? But yeah, so then that's why I really like Steve Reich's music, because it's just pulses, and that just resonates with me, because like it's just like you take that and then it just sort of it doesn't really like on face value, it doesn't look like much, but it actually sort of represents that which is what everything is made out of.
Totally.
And that's why I like percussion music, especially like marimba music, because of the short its quick decay is everything that you play on it is pulses, which is why I think marimba lends itself very well to Steve Reich's music. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so I look for music that's kind of minimalist like that, things that just like really if something just jumps at me and if I like the way it sounds, of course I'll play it right away. But sometimes when I'm trying to think about what music I need to pick next, I also think about what's missing in my repertoire.
Totally.
So like obviously for my recital, I wanted it to be well rounded, and I was thinking to myself, well, what don't I play a lot of? Multi-percussion. Cool, I should definitely look into that. And then obviously, you just go down the regular YouTube rabbit holes or Google rabbit holes or Steve Weiss, like the music catalogs, and you're just like, all right, what is this? What's in here that I'm missing? So it's a lot of trial and error, but I think for a short answer, just like really minimalist music, I think I gravitate towards.
what drew you towards I forget what the exact title of the piece is called, but America, the piece that you did on your recital with electronics and video?
Cycles America by Kojiro Umezaki. Actually, I saw that played on a virtual concert by Less Than 10 Music. And for anybody listening, Less Than 10 is actually they're a really cool group. You should check them out. They're based in Austin. Francis Favis, one of our close friends, is in that group. And so one of the people of Less Than 10, Jordan Walsh, he played it. And then he did a really cool rendition of it because it's supposed to open with improvisation on bass drum suspended cymbals to sort of play along with the electronic background, which is a recording of like waves crashing. But he did a really cool thing where he like had this like synthesizer thing. There was like this entire setup, and it was all just like these crazy strobes and high pitched bleeps. It was crazy. But that's where I saw it first, and I just fell in love with that piece. Mostly because of the just harmonic content, honestly. I just thought it was just so, like... I'm a real sucker for pretty music, which is, like... that's another thing. I just didn't want to say it out loud, but, like, yeah, I'm just a real sucker for things that sound pretty. I like a good 1-5-1. I'll put it that way. I enjoy a good 1-5-1, you know? And also because it was just super accessible, I thought. You know, just like, hey, it's a vibraphone and chords. And, again, narration. Yeah, it's a really cool piece. I'm really in love with that one.
Awesome. So one of the things that I like to really promote on this podcast is the pursuit of like high octane life, or like a relentless pursuit of quality, because I think demystifying that is really important. And I would consider you to be somebody who has a relentless pursuit of quality in regard to like teaching and percussion performance. So there's a book that I've read called Relentless. It's by Tim Grover. He's the former personal trainer for Michael Jordan, and he talks about like having something like to get away from like the intensity of like being in the zone in your relentless pursuit of quality, and like whether you're a basketball player, like percussionist, or like starting small business or whatever. So like, what helps fuel your relentless pursuit of excellence?
I feel like I'm self-driven. I wish I were more self-driven sometimes. I guess all self-driven people always wish that they were more self-driven all the times. I think I'm just worried about time a lot. Because I'm not that old. I'm 26, but I feel like time's always running out. And there's only so much to learn. Like there's only so much you can learn. There's everything in the world to learn, but there's only so much that you can actually physically learn. So anyway, one of the things that I think about a lot and that I carry with me was, and I hate to be one of those guys, but back from when I marched, and I hate people that are like, oh, back in my drum corps days, I absolutely, I'm not going to go off on that. But anyway, but yeah, one of the things that when I was in Cavaliers Indoor, and it's not really so much that, it was just the environment that it was, like all those guys. I had never really been exposed to anything like that before, like just such high level performance all the time from everybody. Like everybody's like sort of not really competing, but everybody's like on fire basically with their performance. And then you look around, like, and I participated in that group in both the drumline and in the front ensemble, but like it's kind of crazy, and it was just a crazy experience to like look to your left and your right, and you see your homeboys freaking going all out, and you're just like, okay, this is bad. I'm going to go ahead and do the same. But one of the things that I learned from like watching those guys, and especially the teachers that we had, is just this sentence: live with intensity. And I've talked to Chuck Willard about this, that he's told me that, like, yeah, they absolutely 100% just flat out said that to us, like, live with intensity. But like but in the back of my head, I'm like, did they say that, or is that something that like I just sort of absorbed by just being there and like looking at them? Because that's something that they always ingrained in us, was just live with intensity, and that's something that I hold very close to me. Is you have to do everything. You can't just half-ass everything, like, or anything at all. Actually, you have to do everything the way that it's meant to be done properly the entire way. And that's something that I try to teach to my students. Again, going back to that example of when I was in a clinic, and I was like, no, we're not going to just slam the drum. We're going to listen, and we're going to do everything the right way. There's a proper way to do things, and that is the best way to do them in a way that gets the best results. And I'm sure you understand this as well, is you need to do things in a way that gets results. Yeah. which means I'm very self. No, the word I'm looking for is reflecting. As educators, we need to do that, and especially as educators, and especially as musicians, obviously, we need to reflect. We're always reflecting. Like, all right, cool. Here's that rep. How did that sound? Immediately, like it's the first thing we do after we're done playing. At least it should be the first thing we do after we're done playing, and always just being aware of, is what you're doing the best work that you can do, and are you going about it in the most efficient way? And again, efficiency I think is very important as well.
Totally. Do you relax with intensity?
I'd say this isn't the question that you asked, but I feel like I'm gonna give this answer because it's sort of the same thing. I think I do well under pressure, mm-hmm. So I think that answers your question. Like it is a little bit not calming, but you definitely have to keep a cool head mm-hmm. when you're trying to do things intensely.
Gotcha. I think I should clarify my question more, even though that was a really interesting answer. So I think what you were answering is like, are you more comfortable under pressure? And I think people who become really elite performers have like learned to be comfortable under pressure. But what I mean is like, if you're pursuing everything in your life with intensity, if you're living with intensity, when you get the opportunity to just relax, do you pursue your relaxation time with intensity?
Oh,
I should have been more clear about that.
No, I get that. I'm not sure I totally get what you mean. Like, I'm not sure I totally.
Yeah. So like, my question is like, when you get the opportunity to relax, and so like because I mean you're a really busy guy. You like obviously have some bit of a day job that you do, all of your percussion teaching, and then like your like impetuous pursuit of excellence. But like when you take time to chill, do you put 100% of yourself into just chilling?
Oh, actually, yes. All right, yeah. So I mentioned before that I play video games a lot. I try, and I've said this before, I try to be good at everything that I do. Like, so there, like, even when I relax, like, I'm pretty competitive, I just say. I'm not very good, but like just because you play, like, online and multiplayer and compete against other people, doesn't mean you're any good at it. So I'm not very good at some of the things that I do. But, yeah, and it's probably not a good thing. People definitely tell me that I don't take much time off.
Yeah.
Especially when I was in grad school. Obviously the summer is a lot different, but especially when I was in grad school, I was like just practicing as much as I could, like all the time, until my hands bled. So relaxing isn't something that I typically do. I usually I usually set that aside for like 6 hours in the middle of the night, and then that's it. But no, I think even when I am trying to relax, I'm always thinking. I'm always just trying to be like active, at least mentally.
Gotcha.
I really don't like just lounging sometimes.
Yeah, I think this is a really good opportunity to say that like there is a pretty profound difference between unwinding and relaxing, and I think unwinding is something that's very accessible to being mentally active. So like for me, a really important part of my unwinding is making sure I'm doing my workout every day. And so like part of the reason I do so much running is because like it's very helpful for my unwinding. But the thing that like does it best for me is like playing sports. So like if I get like when we were at ISU together, like Monday and Tuesday night when pickup soccer happens at the rec, I'm there. Well, as long as I don't have class, I'm there. Because I know that even if I'm only on the field for like 30 to 45 minutes, if there's a lot of people, like I'm going to feel better because I don't have to think during that time, or all of my thinking becomes involuntary and I just get to move. And so like having those things that are outside of our active consciousness that is so much of like our practice time and like our studying time, I think really helps us recover mentally and like unwind mentally in order to like give 1,000% and live intensely when we're pursuing our practicing. But like to say I'm like not an intense athlete or soccer player would be like stupid because I am very much the type of person that's like give 1,000% at everything. And like you, I like to be good at everything. I want to be competitive at everything. So it's really wacky, like finding that mean of like where does the relaxation start and where does the unwinding stop? Because I think there has to be some both. Because like it's impossible to pursue things intensely without some degree of rest. And so, like, when you and Tara and I and a couple of our friends went to the beach a couple weeks ago, like, I would consider that a day of, like, pretty intense relaxation, because we were like, we're just gonna go chill and, like, swim some and then grill out and just hang.
Yeah.
And the intention of my intention of the day is, like, going into, like, I think I practiced a little bit in the morning, like, just to, like, get a little FaceTime in. But in the grand scheme of stuff, I was like, I'm going to do a little bit in the morning, and then I'm not doing anything else the rest of the day.
Oh, yeah. No, I definitely take those days as well, where, like, especially during college as well, while I was, like, in the heat of practicing day in, day out, those days are absolutely important. It's just, and I guess that's probably where the intensity comes in, is the intensity to just, like, willingly do nothing. Which for me feels terrible sometimes. Like, there's just I hate wasting time. I've talked about that before. I feel like time is such a precious resource. So there's a huge amount of guilt that comes in when I'm actually, like, relaxing on purpose. I'm just like, dude, what are you doing? Like, what you could be practicing right now. Which was actually, like, the most demoralizing thing at the beginning of the pandemic. I thought was it was beginning of the pandemic, and everybody was just like, what's happening, what's going on next? And I stole a marimba from ISU because I wasn't sure what was gonna happen. So I was like,
you brought it back. You took it back.
I took it back. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
For liability reasons.
I took it back. It was fine. It was fine the whole time.
He was the GA. He just borrowed it.
Yeah, exactly. But just that insane guilt was, like, amplified at the beginning of the pandemic, because I was like, holy crap, everybody else is in my exact shoes right now. There are probably a lot of those people practicing right now. Why am I not doing that too? And that was, so the first thing that Cavaliers Indoor taught me was live with intensity. The second thing is, if you're not practicing, somebody else is. Like, while you're not getting better, somebody else is. Somebody else is padding right now. And that was, like, the main thing that that was, like, creeping in the back of my mind all the pandemic. Because it felt like a summer vacation at first, and I was like, okay, I'll just relax. Everything is shut down. But in the back of your mind, like, dude, no, the world's still going on. Mm-hmm. And that was another. And this whole thing about maximizing time started getting pushed more to the forefront of my mind at the beginning of the pandemic as well, because I realized time's still going on. Like, I'm still, it's not like, the world didn't take a pause. The world's still going. Time's still going forward. And while I'm not practicing, somebody else is.
Yeah. And I think that's really valuable insight. But the question I had is, like, if you're living your whole life with this idea of, like, every minute I'm not practicing is a minute somebody else is, doesn't that get, like, inefficient at some point?
Yes. Because obviously it's not efficient to practice all the time.
Yeah.
Like, you need breaks. Like, you need sleep. Most importantly, you need to eat, obviously.
Yeah.
But that's another thing as well that I've realized with my with some pieces that I've been playing for actually a couple of years now, that you need time away from things, because how else is it going to mature? Like, if
totally.
I've taken, like, 3-month breaks from a piece. There was one piece, Northern Lights by Elliott Godinez, that I played it for my first recital of grad school, and then that was in February of 2020. And then I stopped playing that piece because I was like, I'm done with it. It's hard as hell. It's just a monster 13-minute marimba solo. And then I did this Steve Weiss Mallet Festival in July. So from February to July, I had not played the piece.
Dang.
And then, and I was like, oh crap, now I gotta play it, like, at a pretty high level for this masterclass that I'm gonna be at. But I gotta say, after, like, that 5-month hiatus on it, I went back, and, like, after getting my hands back for it, I was like, wow, I understand it way better now. So, like, I can play it even better now, and it's more meaningful, and I could, like, bring out more things that I didn't even realize before, and, like, I have a new outlook on it. So yes, you can't just keep going nonstop. There has to be breaks, not only for, like, your sanity, but also so that ideas that you have can continue to mature, because you don't stop really developing your interpretation of a piece when that doesn't stop just because you've stopped playing it.
Yeah. Or even, like, just because you performed it one time.
Yeah.
And one thing I think that not enough young musicians especially think about is, like, just because you played a piece one way doesn't mean it has to be played that way the next time you play it. Like, you can reinterpret stuff.
Exactly.
Like, one of the other things I would say is, like, it's so important to just like not spend time in the practice room, which is very opposed to a lot of the pedagogy at conservatory or even at a lot of music school. Because like living your life is the way to like bring those emotions to the forefront. Again, like we've talked about before, the majority of people who are going to listen to music, hopefully, are people who are not musicians. And if that's the case, like, if your life has been spent in the practice room, how do you relate to them?
Yeah.
Because that's not the experience they lived. So, and I'm kind of, like, writing off of that. Like, how has, like, your relationship with non-musicians affected the way that you perform? Like, as you've become friends with people who aren't necessarily, like, super musically inclined. Or, like, the people in your life who are non-musicians. Like, how has that affected the way you execute your pieces?
Yeah, so I guess it makes me, like... So my girlfriend, Tara, she's a fourth grade teacher. She doesn't really play music at all. Actually, I'm teaching her piano, though. She can play a mean minuet in G by Bach. It's actually pretty good. Yeah, I'm really proud of her. But... That's an important thing to realize, is that like to remind ourselves of as musicians and as classical musicians, is that like get real, you know, like yeah, just get real about what it is that you're doing, you know, like who actually is your audience. Is it you? It's not you. For many people think it's them first. It's not your friends. Who are you actually trying to reach? Because who does it matter to reach? Like, people. Like, that's our job as musicians. It's actually important to reach people. So what does that literally translate to when I'm in the practice room? I'm not getting hung up on the stupid details. Like, oh no, my fulcrum, my marimba technique has to be just right. I gotta like bend at the first knuckle precisely. Nobody else gives a shit about that. Like, you gotta like think about what does it sound like, you know? And again, just going back to the whole idea of like listening. Like, you gotta listen because it's like, obviously, like a non-musician is going to take everything they hear at face value. So how do you amplify that, though?
Yeah. So
it's not so much, it becomes way less about the technique. It just becomes about like the music that you're making.
Totally.
Which should always be at the forefront anyway.
Yeah, I completely agree. One of the things that Jeremy Wilson said to me at masterclass earlier this year was, if you're not your favorite player, you should probably evaluate what you need to do to become your favorite player. And what he's getting at, and that's also like a very reduced paraphrase quote. He said a lot more than that, but that's just what I remember. But like, what he was getting at, I think, is like, there's a big difference between like you being the audience for your music and you cultivating the like echelons or the highlights of what you think good percussion playing is, or what good euphonium playing is, or whatever instrument that you play. In as much as like, oh, I think like this is the proper amount of lyricism, this is the proper amount of technique to put on display within your own artistic voice, which I think is really hard to do.
Yeah.
Because obviously, I mean, especially as like younger musicians like we are, even though we're like starting to enter that really professional sphere, is like there's still so many people that have been doing it for like decades more than we have. And so like for me, like I look at Thomas Rudy and Damondre Thurman's euphonium playing and I'm like, I'd like to be able to do half of what they do.
Yeah.
And it's so tough. But like I think cultivating your artistic voice, and again, like you said, like playing the pieces that you love and that your mind is drawn to really helps you highlight that. I had this really wacky realization earlier this summer. So Kevin Day is somebody that both of us know. And I think Kevin Day's euphonium concerto might be the best euphonium concerto ever written. And I had this wacky come to Jesus moment when I realized, like, I may never perform it. Even though I think I might have been one of, like, the first 10 people to buy it. Like, because... Yeah. But I may never play it because I don't know that that's something I don't know that that's a way I want to showcase my playing. Even though it's probably one of the best pieces ever written
Yeah.
for the instrument, and if it's on a recital, I will go to that recital.
Oh, actually, jumping back a little bit with the whole thing about like non-musicians in my life, but like not simply for that you said that you're probably never going to play it. One piece of advice that I have for young musicians is play. Like, just play it. Like, just play. Like, just play things. Like, you gotta, for one, you gotta perform to get rid of performance anxiety. But you just perform. Like, just start practice, because that's literally what we're supposed to be doing. Yeah. So, and that's why I make most of the videos that I make. Like, Tara like talks to me like. She didn't exactly ask it this way, but she effectively asked like why do you like make those, and I asked myself that too, like why the hell did I record a split version of a piano piece where I took 5 xylophones, or like I recorded myself 5 times and then like just did this weird wacky thing with like all these split 16th notes. Why am I doing that? Well, because that's what I saw when I was coming up. I saw like Casey Cangelosi like playing all of his crazy music, and he has like these like crazy fast hands, and me as a student, I was inspired, like, and by multiple videos on like YouTube of like just drum lines and like about other marimba solos. Like, it's inspiring. And then I was just like, okay, that's cool, I'm gonna go ahead and do this, because hopefully somebody will look at that and hopefully somebody will be like, wow, that's pretty cool, I didn't know that was possible. Like when I played a freaking dubstep piece on timpani, like that was dumb, and I didn't have to do that. But I was like, this is kind of cool. This is kind of the kind of thing that I really like. I'm going to go ahead and do this because it's fun. And if somebody sees it and wants to do something like that, freaking awesome.
Absolutely.
And I used to tell myself that, especially when I was like a naive freshman coming into ISU, was like, I want to be a music educator because I want to change somebody's life. Well, yeah, absolutely. And I've always like thought of that's the whole point of music education, and why we want to be good musicians is we want to pass down these ideas, and we want to like pass down these standards, and we want to like inspire hopefully anybody to do something similar like this, because that's how we keep the art going. That's how we keep it alive.
Totally. One of the things I think about when I hear the advice like musicians just need to play more and I've talked about this a lot to a lot of people. I think stand-up comedians are such an underrated case study for classical musicians, because in stand-up comedy, they basically, what everybody says is like, if you haven't bombed a ton, you're never gonna kill. Like, nobody comes out and just kills.
Yeah.
Like, even Dave Chappelle, who's probably one of the greatest stand-up comedians of all time, has bombed.
Yeah.
And the reason he kills so much now, I mean, yeah, there's obviously a huge amount of talent there, but like, you can't get to the point where you kill like Dave Chappelle does, or like Bill Burr does, or like Whitney Cummings does, without like having bombed tons in your background. But a lot of musicians think, oh, I'm gonna like shed a load of hours in the practice room and I'll kill immediately.
Yeah.
Which is silly.
Yeah. No, that doesn't happen.
It's just silly. And so like, for me, it was so hard trying, and because I had like boatloads of performance anxiety, like especially when I first got to college. Like, I used to tremble when I played. Wow. And like, one of the things that I decided to like Navy SEAL my way through my performance anxiety by just like I decided I was going to practice outside on the quad, because at Illinois State, I mean, there's 15,000 to 20,000 students walking across the quad for at least 5 to 10 minutes every hour. And so I figured, like, oh, with an audience this big, what's the worst that could happen? I mean, it also didn't help that the practice rooms at school were 1 billion degrees, and, like, there weren't enough of them. And so, like, for the sake of climate control, as well as, like, having practice room space available, bringing a stand outside was just easier. But then, like, so, I mean, it was a convergence of factors. But, like, I mean, if you're at your absolute worst, like, learning music in front of 20,000 people that, I mean, granted, a lot of them couldn't care less about you. Like, how well will you play when the 40 people you like and enjoy come to your recital?
Yeah, that's definitely good advice. And that's advice that I've gotten before, that you shouldn't sound good in the practice room. Like, if you sound good in the practice room, you're wasting your time.
Yeah. Or I think a better way maybe to say that is like you should always be pursuant in like your highest quality of sound, but if you're practicing things that you're good at, you're probably not improving.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You never want to practice everything that you're good at.
Definitely. So what do you plan to like do anything in terms of like pursuing like opportunities to bomb going forward? Because I've thought about that a lot. Like I've thought about like, oh, should I sign up for open mic night and take like a new euphonium and electronics piece to it? Like,
I have thought about that. There's at PASIC, the last one that I went to, there was like a suitcase vibraphone. It was crazy. It was like a full size vibraphone. I mean, obviously the bars were like kind of narrow, but it was like a full range vibraphone, and it had like it basically collapsed into itself and fit into what looked kind of like a suitcase. I think it was a suitcase if I remember. And I was like, that is badass. I need that because, and I've talked about this with Francis, because a vibraphone for one is way cheaper. I think they're like maybe $3,000 for a decent one, whereas a 4 1/3 marimba could probably still get you at like you could probably get one for $3,000 as well. But the music you can play on a vibraphone I think is more accessible than marimba, and you can also travel easier with a vibraphone than you can with a marimba.
Jazz.
Yeah, exactly. And jazz. That's all you fucking need. Exactly, right there. So yeah, the possibilities are literally endless there. But yeah, I've thought about that. I haven't like seriously entertained the idea, but like I've thought about it, especially back at ISU, like at the Coffee Hound.
Yeah.
What if I just if I didn't have the suitcase vibraphone, what if I just took the band truck, stole a vibraphone from the studio, and like just hauled it over to the Coffee Hound and just played it for a little bit?
Borrowed a vibraphone from the studio.
There we go. Well, yeah, of course. I mean, I feel like if I had a vibraphone, that'd be amazing. I would happily do that all the time, and it's because it just seems like kind of not the audience, but like just seems kind of like the place for that kind of thing anyway.
Oh, totally.
Or like maybe even a park. I know Carolyn Stollard. She's in New York, and she busks with her vibraphone. And I see her post about her on Instagram. I forgot her Instagram. Otherwise, I'd plug it right now. But I'm sure you can find her by her name, Carolyn Stollard. But yeah, she just plays vibraphone like in the park. And I'm like, that sounds awesome. I'm not a good vibraphone player, but I would do something like that. And I think as performers as well, we need to, as musicians as well, we need to create opportunities anyway. Because nobody's gonna email me and be like, hey, I'm a coffee place. We want to play some contemporary vibraphone literature in my thing. So you just gotta find those places.
I'm like the perfect case for that. Like, who calls a euphonium player for anything?
You just gotta insert yourself.
Like that 8 orchestral excerpts that have euphonium, they're just like, hey, trombone 3, want to play euphonium?
Wouldn't that be funny?
Yeah, I've definitely thought a lot about that too. Even just like a casual open mic thing, or even like trying to. Well, I mean, we talk about curating performing opportunities, but like curate an open mic. It's like, what's the worst that could happen?
Or just go play outside.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, just go play outside.
What is it like not having access to your full lineup of instruments whenever you need it? I mean, like, you do, but like, you kind of don't.
I mean, I still sort of vaguely have access to ISU's percussion equipment, but I got to drive out there, which is like a 45-minute drive, which isn't the worst, but I mean, it definitely puts a damper in the day.
Yeah, but I don't have to drive 45 minutes to practice tuba.
Yeah, exactly. So it's very rough, especially when you're somebody that's more attached to those things. Like, I wish I was more of a drum set person, because I, by this point in my career, would have more than likely have had a drum set to just dick around on all the time. But unfortunately, I chose the very stock trap path that most percussionists fall into, which is like, I'm going to practice marimba for forever. And so that I'm like, well, congrats, idiot. Now you don't have your fucking instrument or access to anything. So it sucks in that regard. But again, that's the cool thing about percussion is, like, now it's that time. Like, now it's my break from marimba, and now it's that time to do those things that I keep telling myself but don't really do. That I was to do those things that I said I need to catch up on, which is like my snare drum playing, which I've caught up a little bit on. But the fun thing is that I actually kind of have fun with those weirder things. There's a book called Complementary Percussion Etudes by Keith Aleo, who's a percussionist, and it's just straight up triangle solos and tambourine solos, bass drum solos, like concert bass drum, and crash cymbals. And this book was crazy, and I picked it up in my first year of grad school, and it changed the way that I like approach a lot, not just those instruments, but like every other instrument, is because it's just music. And it's so weird because you wouldn't think of like, oh, I'm gonna write a triangle, I'm gonna write a piece of music and it's gonna be for a triangle. You don't really think about that sometimes, but he did it. He had like all of the trappings and trimmings of like a piece of music. They weren't like profound or anything, but like some of them are really interesting. And he offered nothing. He's like, nope, here's a couple of exercises that I think might help you do this on triangle, but otherwise nothing. Like no indication of where to play, no indication of what type of beater to use or anything. Those triangle ones really, really messed me up because I was like trying to like,
That's fascinating.
I was trying to like a whole note with like a tie off of it. How the hell do I do that after I've been dinging already on this damn piece of metal the whole time? But I like that kind of shit because like it forced me to think about. It forced me to listen in ways that I didn't really consider before. So that's what it's like to not have access to my primary instruments.
Yeah.
Is you start going down some really weird roads of playing triangle for a little bit.
Do you think of yourself much as a multi-instrumentalist?
Yeah, you have to be. As a percussionist, you definitely have to be.
Yeah, well, because I mean, like in just what you were talking about like triangle, I've never had to think about playing euphonium that way, because like I mean, it's a bunch of different styles of literature, but I'm operating the same instrument, and so like, how has like being a multi-instrumentalist affected the way you listen?
Well, for the example with the triangle, it's like it made me sit down with my, and I don't have a crappy. It's a pretty decent. It's like a Black Swamp 10-inch triangle, and I sat down with it, and before I even like started learning the music out of this etude book, I was like, what are all of the sounds that I can make? And learning this music, I got very intimately familiar with like my triangle. Like I can make, and now I'm at the point where I can make the sound that I want on it, which is actually kind of where you want to be as a percussionist, honestly.
That's incredible.
And now I'm just like, I understand like, okay, if I strike it from this angle and with this amount of weight, it'll actually activate like the what I would consider the more bassy, the lower frequencies. Yeah. And then if I attack it from this angle with this part of the beater, it gets like a very, very light ping that's super thin but still bright enough to be heard. And it's just like, and then you just like you learn to listen, but not only learn to listen, you the listening controls the way that you strike the instrument.
Totally.
It influences the way that you strike the instrument. And now, when I'm on marimba, which I already considered myself to be a decent marimbist, I'm like, holy crap, I can just like minorly change one little aspect about the way that I'm approaching it. Like, it could just be the angle of my mallets. And already it's enough of a difference that I'm like, wow, I thought I knew this instrument. But now it seems like I gotta like sit down again with this and really understand what are the sounds that you can make.
Gotcha. Do you think there's a space for like a major work for like a solo percussion instrument like triangle or bass drum that isn't just for the memes? Like, what is it? Prokofiev who has the concerto for bass drum, but it's like
I haven't heard that.
It's like completely for the memes.
I don't know that that's happened.
It's like a famous, like, I don't remember who it is. It might be Prokofiev, but like there's a famous romantic composer who is like concerto for bass drum, and it very much seems like it's just for the memes.
Well, it's interesting that you say that. I think, and I really hope that I'm not like blaspheming all of percussion history right now by saying this, but like that's how the first marimba concerto was sort of premiered. It was sort of for the memes. The first marimba concertino. I mean, there's a case for it to be. There's a case to be made that it was the first one. Was written and played by an all-female orchestra at the time, and then the soloist was a female. I don't think it was Vita Chenoweth. It was Ruth something. I can't remember her name. And obviously, she played it fantastic. You could look up I found the review of that premiere, and who was it? Barber, I think, was also on that concert. And then the person that wrote this review praised the marimba solo, which was supposed to be like the novelty of the night. And then the review, I think it even called it the novelty of the night. Like, the novelty of the night turned out to be spectacular, blah, 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 whatever. And then, meanwhile, in the same breath, Barber has a lot of maturing to do in his sound or some shit like that. I think that's what it was. I don't know. I think that's what it was. I don't know.
Casually to one of the greatest American
exactly.
of all time.
It might have been Barber. But yeah, so like, the first marimba concerto started sort of as a meme, but now it's kind of like it's kind of like among like the standard literature. But there are pieces that are written for those solo instruments that exists. I would say definitely not for the meme. What's it called? A Fast Ride in a Silver Streetcar, I think is what it's called. Something about a silver streetcar, and it's why do I not know the name of it? But it's for solo triangle, and it's mentioned in the Steve Schick book. Steve Schick talks about it way better than I ever could. But it's basically you're just like repeating an ostinato, just steady rhythms the entire time. But the whole piece is about small change in the sound that is the triangle. There's also
do you mic the triangle for that piece?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay.
I don't think so. Another one that comes to mind is never having written a note for percussion, which is one that I really want to record desperately. And all it is a decrescendo, crescendo and decrescendo roll on a gong. That's all it is. And then you can look this up, and people play it for like 30 minutes, just a roll so as loud as they can, and then they decrescendo. And those pieces are really cool, and I love those pieces as well. For the same reason that I liked that Keith Aleo book with the triangle stuff, is because it's all about the overtones, and it's all about the colors that you can make off of just that one instrument. And it's pretty crazy. Like, I don't know if you've ever been in a room where like that something like that has happened, but obviously, like, if you're rolling in a triangle for forever, eventually the different overtones you start hearing, and then the shimmering of it, and then the gong would do the same thing. The air starts to shake.
Yeah, there's I don't remember what the name of the group is. A flute and percussion duo came to ISU when I was a senior.
Oh, I think I know what this is.
I ran their recital, and the reason I asked if you mic the triangle, I don't know if that was a personal choice that he made, but he had me mic a triangle for a piece where he'd literally just like constantly hit the triangle for like 15-20 minutes.
That might have been it. And I don't know if it's common practice to play, mic it. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like. So I don't know. Those pieces have already been done. So I don't know what other instrument you could do something like that for, and it would be like just as profound as I think that both of those are. Maybe like Almglocken or something cool. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I've thought before about like it'd be really cool to have like a piece for like bass drum and like wind ensemble, or bass drum and orchestra, where like, and obviously electronics because I'm me, but like, but like, can you create narrative with that, and maybe like a really poetic solo in which like that is the main focus of the instrument, and approach it like super seriously. And like part of the reason I think that way is like, I mean, tuba and euphonium a little less so, because like tuba and trombone really bore the brunt of this, and euphonium is just like, I mean, euphonium players take themselves so seriously a lot of the time that like I mean, and with the brass band tradition, it lends itself to being a soloist because it just can carry over the ensemble so effectively, and it blends with everything. But like, the joke that I am like saving for when people ask like, "What's a euphonium good at?" I'm just gonna say boost gain.
Oh my god!
I mean, it's true. Like, it blends with everything. It just boosts gain. But like, with trombone and tuba concertos, especially, like, they're in the orchestra world in particular, there's just this huge history of like, oh, you're a brass player, what can you really do? Like a famous early tuba solo is a children's book called Tubby the Tuba that has an orchestra part that goes with it.
Oh my God.
It's just like about a fat tuba, and it's like, okay, can we get away from the stereotype of all tuba players just being like stupid, fat, and lazy? Because they're definitely not. I mean, like, does the community lean into it? Absolutely. But like, can we get away from this? But like, I mean, when Christian Lindbergh premiered the first performed the first trombone concerto with orchestra, like, the conductor made him stand behind the orchestra because he's like, everything's too bombastic and too loud.
Oh my God.
He's like one of the greatest trombone players of all time.
Yeah.
And definitely one of the most revolutionary. So like, I'm tired. Well, I mean, aren't we all tired of the orchestral elitism? But like, it's frustrating to me that like that's the history. So like the question becomes like, how do we turn that around?
Commission your pieces.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, just keep playing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's something I think is super important, especially in the realm of advocating for living composers, which is obviously super easy for us given the instruments we play. Yeah. Especially, so I tried to not perform anything by somebody that's dead unless I knew them before they died. So like David Maslanka and St. Palafian are obvious exceptions because, well, and obviously because they had such a huge impact on me personally. But like, I mean, going into a conference and saying like, oh, I'm a euphonium player that only plays music by people that are alive. It's like, oh, so you're just not playing the first 5 years of euphonium literature.
Yeah.
But so like, I guess a question that raises for me is like, what do you think, like, in terms of pursuing more works by living composers, what would you recommend to people who don't know where to start on that?
Well, for one, I mean, like, I guess the easiest thing to do is just browse the catalogs. Like for percussionists have Steve Weiss music, and then I don't know. I guess I don't have a great answer to that question, because my answer would be like what I did was I went to PASIC, which isn't like super accessible. Unfortunately, I mean, there's like obviously a money barrier, which it's not crazy expensive, but money is always going to be a barrier, like regardless of the price, I think. Mm-hmm. And then, so I just go and like actually meet those people. I think that's probably it. Is like those people that you meet and the people that you work with. I commissioned you. Yeah, you're still alive, so
I hope so. It'd get really weird. For sure. Yeah, I mean, and that's so powerful for like having a collaborative aspect early. It's like, what is it like to work with a living composer, and also like for composers, like what's it like to write for living performers? And that's kind of the beauty of like the artist colony that is music school. And that's an opportunity to get out of the practice room and like meet new people and talk about interesting things. I feel like too many people at music school only know the people in their studio or in their ensemble that they play in.
Oh yeah. Oh, and yeah, I guess that's my answer to your question then is just commission your fucking composer friends. you know them. They're waiting for you. Like they'll do it. Like what else are they doing?
Yeah.
Because chances are sometimes they're Andrew McGowan and they write some good shit. So just do it.
Yeah, but I mean, like even if the first 5 pieces aren't that great, if they're like 3-minute pieces that they wrote during undergrad, like honestly, those probably aren't going to sell that much anyway. But like the growth between piece number 1 and piece number 7 is huge. Like I'm confident that the first percussion piece I gave you was like nowhere near like good music. And I mean, Dryer at 307 Hubby is very much its own kind of beast. That's also on Elliott's YouTube channel, in addition to In the Dark Blue Sky You Keep. So go check those out. But like, I mean that piece is so weird in that like the concept of it is not very regular in terms of like, I mean, yeah, it's an electroacoustic mixed percussion piece, but how often do you find piece for like a Dryer that has a belt freight and has been recorded and then has been transcribed onto break drums and turns into a fugue with kick drum? Like that's just weird.
Yeah, definitely create those opportunities. Like creating opportunities is something that we have to do. So you recording that thing, and then me with like lots of transcriptions that I do. Like just experiment. Like because then you'll learn something about your instrument. You'll learn something more about music. Like why? Like you don't really have anything to lose by just experimenting.
Totally. This is a huge non sequitur, but like, what took you back to practicing piano? Because I know like there was a while where you weren't doing that, and then you like jumped back into piano studio.
Well, I did band in 5th grade, and then in 6th grade I was like, hey, look at the piano, it looks kind of like a glockenspiel, and then I started just practicing like band tunes that I knew on it, and then eventually I was like, this is all at church. I grabbed like the church hymnal, and I was like looking at it, and I was like, okay, that makes sense. I had to teach myself bass clef, and then I just started practicing. So that's how I started.
Super impressive.
That's sort of how I got started on it. And then for a while, I wanted to be good at it because obviously, like, and I guess that whole thing started obviously for me when I was younger. When I first started in music, I was like, I need to be good at piano. Like, I just have to do it. And I fell in love with the instrument, obviously. And then in high school, I was, keeping up with it. And in college, I told myself that I was going to keep up with it even more. But obviously, college got really busy. But that's one thing that I'm really glad that I did was continuing to study it, like to actually study it. Because prior to college, I had never taken any lessons.
Dang.
Yeah, like ever, or percussion lessons for that matter either. And then that was the best thing that I could have done for myself, for my marimba playing, and for most of my playing. And I recommend that anybody else does this as well. Is take lessons in your not primary instrument, because there's literally so many. For every instrument that exists, there is the exact same amount of interpretations of music.
Yeah.
Like of ways to like look at music, because of the technique and the way that you operate the instruments influences the way that you play it.
Yeah.
And then so when I was taking piano lessons, I started learning a lot of things about myself, like the tension that I carry in my hands. What is a piano supposed to sound like? Actually, is one of the main things I learned in lessons as well. So yeah, what made me to go back to it was I just the professors were there and they were like really nice enough to just let me in the studio. So I was like, hey, if I'm already paying for these credit hours, somehow, like, I'll just add, what's another one? Just take piano lessons. So I'm really glad that I did that. I wouldn't consider myself as great at piano as I am at percussion, but it's a lot of fun, and it's a skill that's obviously invaluable in a lot of ways.
Totally. Well, I think it's valuable to have interdisciplinary influences on the way you think. I mean, for everybody, but, like, there's almost an extra wrinkle in that, in, like, it's interdisciplinary while still being music. And that's what, like, for me, it's being a composer performer. Like, the way I play is very much influenced, and the way I think about music is very influenced by the way I write, and the opposite is true. Like, the way I write is very influenced, like, by the way I play. And one of the things that's really interesting as far as my creative process is, like, I get all the notes on the page, and then I go back and, like, try to sing through all of them, and the dynamic inflections that I put, unless it's very obvious, like, oh, this needs to be a louder section of the piece, like, are all performed after all of the notes are on the page, so I can make it as hopefully as intuitive as possible.
Yeah.
And so, like, that's, I don't think I would write as well if I didn't approach it that way. But, like, at the same time, it creates some frustration because, like, so I was up in Chicago on Tuesday as the euphonium TA for the ISYM tuba camp, and, like, I was getting so frustrated with some of the arrangements because it was, like, all of this stuff super, like, stacked on top of each other. So, like, I went to one of the other euphonium players and I was like, in this chart, in this section, take euphonium 2 up an octave. In this section, take euphonium 2 up an octave. I'm going to do the same on euphonium 1, and it's, like, going to make the whole long sound. Like, the euphoniums will come through more because I think the camp had, like, a 2-to-1 ratio of tubas to euphoniums. They were, like...
Oh, wow.
Yeah, like, there was all bottom. It was kind of amazing. But, like, I mean, just having those frequencies are going to cut so much more. But, like, just in terms of interpreting that kind of stuff. And I get on soapboxes about, like, engraving now, too. And, like, there are times where I'll, like, look at a piece and be like, I'd love to play this, but the engraving is terrible. So, like, I can either, A, redo it all myself so that it's, like, easier to read on the page, or just, like, I just won't play it. which seems super elitist, but the message to the composers and arrangers out there is, like, it behooves you to take the time to make your music as easy to interpret as possible. And sometimes that's, and, like, if it's a really difficult piece of music to interpret, like, that might be really, really difficult. But, like, one of the guiding philosophies I've had, and part of the reason, like, why I was so on top of always asking you to, like, hey, can you look at my stuff? Like, is this stupid? Like, how would you want this notated? Or, like, can we get time in the percussion studio to go mess around with stuff to see if this works? Is, like, if your music is nice to look at and people feel like, even if it's difficult, like, everything is clear and makes sense, that is a calling card in and of itself. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't like talking too much about engraving sometimes because, or, like, notation. It's sort of like I don't know if I'm using this term correctly, like a double-edged sword, where there's so much you could obviously tell to the performer in the notation and the way that you're engraving things, like, you know, obvious things like slur marks or like stems up or stems down showing like musical line. But at the same time, I feel like it's the whole elitism of like musical engraving. I think Western musical notation is kind of elitist in its own way because it's limiting so much things of sounds. Like it's limiting sound into like 12 pitches and all these rhythms and then like all this other crap.
Yeah, I mean, like, I can't imagine how difficult it would be to transcribe something Jacob Collier sings.
Oh, yeah. Well, he does it his damn self, so it's fine.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally get that. And, like, it's really interesting exploring, like, quality of engraving as a composer because, like, as somebody who wants not... I need to think of a better way to say this. I don't want every recording of my piece to sound identical. I want everybody... Like, I want it to be obvious and accessible to everybody that plays my music. Like, you should put your own artistic stamp on this. And so, like... trying to engrave something in such a way where that's obvious and also accessible is really, really wacky.
And I feel like that's the hardest job of a composer sometimes is not giving too much because of that fear that it'll all sound exactly the same. Because you definitely don't want, and you don't want to hold. I think that as well. You don't want to hold the hands of the performer like you need to phrase this exactly this way because this is how I intended, or instead of trusting them to do their thing, you know. But that's part of the beauty of the creative process, I think, is especially when you're working with the performer and the composer and they're working together, is you get to balance those things back and forth, like especially from draft to draft or whatever, like, and then new ideas or new meanings come out just because of like simple changes in a notation as well.
Totally. When I think being conscious about also not giving too little information, is huge too.
Unless you're writing a technique book.
Yeah.
Unless you're writing a technique book for triangle.
The purposeful ambiguity. When, like, I wonder how you think about this, but, like, one of the issues I run into, especially now that I'm primarily only playing stuff by people who are alive, is, like, or, like, recently written pieces by people who are alive, rather. Like, how do you, like, separate this idea of, like, if a piece has only been recorded one time, like, where do you take artistic liberties? Like, what about that recording is gospel versus what isn't? Like, if only one person has performed it. Like, so, for example, the Barfield Euphonium Concerto that I mentioned earlier, Andre's the only person that's played that. So, like, what parts are things where I can go off into my own world versus, like, what's the gospel? Because, I mean, he's probably the greatest euphonium player on the planet right now. Maybe ever.
I've never really bought into that whole thing of just like you have to, you know, like just using I've never bought into the whole thing of just using recordings as like the standard, you know. I don't like that. I've never really thought of that in the way that I've played, and mostly I think it's, I don't want to say like naivete, my own naiveness. It's just you definitely have to express music in a way that is all that's from you. You know, that's one thing that I sort of prided myself in. I'm not sure how much pride I should take in it, but of the fact that I didn't take piano lessons. So when I played Bach, one of the first Bachs I ever learned was his Prelude No. 1 in C major. Like I opened up the book, it was the first thing there, like from the thing. I learned it. I didn't have anybody to tell me what it was supposed. I don't know who the fuck Bach was. I was like, somebody told me I should play him, so I'm gonna go ahead and play him. That's all I knew about Bach, was that I should play him. And then, so I learned it, and then it was like the first prelude. And obviously, me, like being the sucker I am for pretty things, I was like, this sounds beautiful. I mean, all the pedal in the world is how I played it. My interpretation. And most people, most pianists will be like, you probably don't want to, you know, massive pedal everything in Bach.
Yeah. But I mean, that's not like how it was written. Like, exactly, piano hadn't been invented yet. But like at the same point, like the fact that you can pedal Prelude No. 1 specifically makes it maybe one of the most aesthetically pleasing pieces of music ever written. And
it was to me. and it was to me, the then lay person might as well have been on piano, like just
like
my
8th grade Elliott.
Yeah, and I'm like, this sounds amazing. But also like, but you know, but then that was back when I fit, I guess, like back with the majority of the population that would have agreed, like, that sounds way better, instead of like, probably the way that it was written, where it was super dry and like no pedal or anything. I'm probably on harpsichord, honestly.
Yeah.
So, and that's why I don't buy into the whole thing of like that whole tradition of sound with Baroque music, because and that's when you start getting into the areas where people get super like just their nose up in the air about it and everything, like, no, you have to play Bach this way or whatever, and I don't really buy into that. Like, what sounds good, man? What feels good?
Yeah. Well, also, like, I mean, if we had only ever pursued like things have to be played this way, literally the best recording of Goldberg Variations wouldn't exist, because Glenn Gould was like, I'm gonna not do what everybody said to do.
And then you get into the idea of, is that person, and I think I can't remember I heard this, is that person brave, or are they bold or brave? Like,
Yeah.
were they bold enough to like ingenious enough to have that idea to do it differently, or are they just brave enough to be the person to do that? Like Steve Reich's, no, not Steve Reich, like John Cage's 433.
Yeah, and that's very much a case where I think the answer is just yes. Like,
yes,
he's bold enough to be the first to try it, and brave enough to also be the first person to publish it.
Yeah.
Which is the beauty of John Cage, in a lot of respects. So we're like really running on time, but one of the things I wanted to talk about is your nonprofit. Can you? I'm just gonna give you the stage a little bit to talk about that, and then I'll ask follow-up questions as they come.
Yeah, sure. So this idea for this nonprofit, it's called the Godinez Percussion School. It started. It's an idea that sort of came up really recently. I was preparing, as part of my applications for doctorate school, I was preparing my statement of purpose, and like just trying to come up with ideas of like, what is it really that I wanted to do and bring to the world, and the world of music, and to my community, which like embarrassingly enough I hadn't actually given a ton of thought to. But from the beginning of my undergrad, I knew that I wanted to give back to my community. I knew that I always wanted to teach, first and foremost. And I felt like sometime during my undergrad, I sort of lost that fire to go back to Chicago specifically, which was my original goal. Because I just didn't, I was just looking at the reality, when the reality is sad sometimes, that the state of education and music education is kind of garbage in a lot of places, really unfortunately. So then I was looking back at just like my upbringing. I didn't have access to lessons. I mean, and being in Chicago, I'm like, there's literally the CSO. There's like the world's best musicians in the world, and I don't have access to like lessons, or I don't even know where to go to like keep learning. I mean, not to say that I had nothing growing up. I'm thankful for everything that I had. Anyway, so what I decided was to just sort of start up this whole school where I would go and offer free lessons, free mallets and sticks, and hopefully free instruments like little baby xylophones or glockenspiels or drums or accessories, whatever the path may go, to inner city Chicago students who otherwise wouldn't have had access to lessons. It's something that I wanted to see in the community when I was growing up. It's something that I would have loved to have had access to when I was growing up. And now that I have the means to do so, I feel like, why not? Like, just do this thing. Because it's what I was supposed to do, I think,
Yeah.
Like, you're supposed to give back.
Yeah. One of the most powerful things I think I've ever heard was at the opening ceremony for the Music for All National Festival in Indianapolis in, it would have been like March of 2013. And Tim Lotzenheiser was talking about how, like, the great Tim Lotzenheiser, I should say. This guy's freaking amazing. But he said, there's so many people that spend their like junior and senior year of high school going like, we got so much worse. When I was a kid, like the seniors wouldn't have like tolerated any of this. And I think a lot of that is just like, we put the people we look up to on pedestals, especially when we're that young.
Yeah. But
his advice was like, be for other people what those folks were for you.
Yes.
Which is like, especially as somebody who was like 16 at the time, was earth shattering for me. And I think that like the imagination of the Godinez Production School is like a perfect way to encapsulate that.
Yeah, exactly. And and one thing that I sort of mentioned earlier in this discussion is that money is a barrier, no matter how much or how little. Because so I lied a little bit. I did have lessons in high school for percussion. I can't remember his name. Oh, I can't remember his name. I'll remember it later. But somebody from the Chicago Sinfonietta, 3 percussionists from the Chicago Sinfonietta, would come and help out our percussion section, and then for some of us, they would give us lessons. But I didn't really consider those to be lessons because I had like 2 or 3 of them. So that's sort of how it went. But I remember then, I remember then that like they were supposed to be free, but it was encouraged that if you had any money to give, to give it. And I was like, cool, that's awesome. So these are free lessons, right? It was essentially how I took that. But I remember though that even in high school, and like, yeah, I lived in poverty, but I wasn't like, as you know, the situation wasn't totally dire. But I couldn't have asked my parents for like $10 to give to a private instructor, and also $10 for lessons. Are you kidding me? Who even does? I mean, so like, so I figured like no amount of money should be
like $10 for a half hour is like, I mean, it's still above minimum wage in Illinois now, but like, not by a lot.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, you know, I obviously don't want there to be any obstacles, and as opposed to, and like in addition to that, like just continue to build people up. Like why it's easy to get mallets and sticks out to people, you know, and it's easy to get materials. Literally, like all it's costing me is my time. So, but yeah, so that's the idea behind it. What's up?
Sorry, what were you gonna say?
I said hopefully it'll start up this next year. I got a lot of planning to do. As it turns out, non-for-profits are really lots of paperwork involved. So I gotta like, you know, do a lot of my own research on my ends to actually get this thing rolling. But yeah, I'm hoping to expand it as well, and just to, you know, until it's something that is not only just for the individuals that are in it, for the individual students that are in it, but obviously if I'm teaching percussionists, you have better percussionists in band programs in Chicago. Totally. And then hopefully someday, you know, by continuing to elevate even like the small section of, you know, Chicago music programs, which is like Chicago percussion sections, which is only like maybe a handful of students of the actual population, but you know, maybe the band quality can continue to increase, and you'll start seeing Chicago schools back out there at state competitions and everything. Totally. Because when I was coming, and you obviously hear about this everywhere, like anywhere you are, but you hear about the good old days and everything. But obviously, Chicago schools used to be like really competitive and really freaking good, like playing grade 6 literature, like in high school, and like the All City Band and everything. Which the All City Band doesn't even exist anymore. That was the program that I was in Chicago, and when it started, also kind of when that area of Chicago was mostly white, but that's a different discussion. They were doing like crazy things, like just, you know, being a fantastic band program. But now, obviously, with, you know, the budget cuts and everything to Chicago public schools, those sorts of programs don't exist anymore, which is tragic because in Chicago, especially, you need programs like that. You need after-school programs, and you need things for students to belong to, because what else is there? There's fucking gangs.
Yeah,
it's such a and what's his name? That poor kid, Adam Toledo, I think, who was just killed in Chicago. And so when that happens, some of my old band directors were on Facebook were talking about, like, he was a kid, he could have been one of their students, you know. Yeah. And it's just really, as unfortunate and fucked up as that whole situation was. Why was he in gangs, man? You could be doing something else, kid. Like, and I don't want to get too far deeper into that, but these sorts of things need to exist.
Totally. One of the things I think about when we talk about like underfunded schools and stuff is how many people like that could be potentially world-class musicians are we missing by just a sheer lack of financial support, and that's literally the only barrier. Another one that comes to mind is like in terms of just like getting better education and quality materials is like, I mean, that gets kids excited to learn more, but like if the entry level just keeps rising, and so like because quality of pedagogy is rising, like that means that when by like the standard by when they get to college, if they decide to do that, is also exponentially higher.
Yeah.
Because you're only getting quality teaching early. And so then the ceiling of percussion in general, or like music in general, if we took this to a broader sense, can only get raised.
Exactly. And it's also important to remember it's not, and I remind myself a lot about this, it's not about creating the next amazing world-class performers.
Totally.
It's about, because you got to think back to what's the point of education? You're creating the best citizens. You're creating the best people, the best human beings, which is the point of music education. And also the other thing besides that is not only are you trying to create better human beings, is that I just lost my point.
I totally get what you mean, and I think like what the idea also is, I think the idea that you might get like a student who goes on to even become like a professional percussionist, let alone best of the best, is the icing on the cake.
Yeah.
And that like providing students with like a higher quality of life is point number one.
That's what I meant. Yeah, there you go. It's just, because like you got to have a quality education, and you need all parts to be there. Like the arts have to be there as well.
One of the things my band director said to me in high school that like floored me every time he said it, and he always saved it for like the end of the year. He's like, I mean, if you guys go to do the music thing forever, that's great, but my job is to help you love music and articulate how and why you love music.
Yes.
And so like, I mean, and I think creating a sense of community, like performing organizations are so good for that. I mean, like a lot of people make fun of the theater kids who are like bawling their eyes out after their last show, but there's a reason they feel that way. There's a reason they have that that closeness with each other and that community and that camaraderie in a lot of sense. Or even like if you go back to like our marching band time, whether it was in the berm or not, like part of the reason like we look back and talk about some of the experiences we went through, good or bad, is because like we developed a community as a result of that. Or like when we were in Phi Mu Alpha and our treasurer embezzled the balance of our checking account. Like, I don't know if I felt closer to people in the chapter than when I watched some upperclassmen throw money at our president so we could have money to pay expenses. It was gnarly.
Fuck Brad. Man. That was cursed.
That was cursed.
Yeah.
But yeah. So, I think, we've done about 2 hours.
Nice.
That's probably a good place to cut it off.
Yeah. On that note.
Can you plug your socials really quick?
Yeah, sure. Well, you just find most of my socials on my website, ElliottGodinez.com. That's 2 L's and 2 T's. You'll have no idea how many times in my life my name has been misspelled with either one or the other.
Oh, I'm sure I've done at least half of them.
Yeah. Yeah, you just find all my stuff there.
Cool. And then, obviously, stuff for Godinez Percussion School is on his website. But then, check out his YouTube, which is just Elliott G Percussion.
My Instagram is at Elliott G Percussion, and YouTube is just my name, Elliott Godinez, same as my website.
Cool. And you can see his new performance of In the Dark Blue Sky You Keep for Glockenspiel and Electronics, which is my new piece that he put out last week. So, thanks so much, everybody.
Goodbye.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Musical Trick Artista podcast. You can find us online at McGowanmusic.com or listen on your favorite podcast platform. You can also visit us at Andrew McGowan on YouTube or Music McGowan on Instagram.